Picture this. You've spent a decade building a thriving studio you absolutely love. It's profitable, it's fulfilling, everything's working. Then you decide to sell it all and walk away. Today, I'm talking with Eric Bourassa, a studio owner who did exactly that. We dive into why he chose to sell, what the selling process was like, and the personal realizations it brought him. Eric also shares something most people won't. He had serious regrets after the sale was final. This is a raw, honest conversation about business ownership, vision, and the decisions that shape our futures. All on this episode of Rock School Proprietor Podcast. If you're a guitar instructor and you've used one of the dozen or so popular method books, you've probably noticed that gap between what's in the books and what students actually want to learn. Most guitar students want to play their favorite songs, and that means strumming, chord changes, timing. If that stuff is even in those method books, it's usually way in the back. I put together the exercises in Complete Guitar Strumming to cover the foundational concepts that all guitar students need, but in a practical way that applies to their goals, which is playing their favorite songs. For instructors, the book comes with an instructor companion guide that walks you through best practices for teaching. I even have training videos that I've used with my own staff that you can access as well. The guide and the videos are free for anyone who wants to use the book for teaching. If you want to get really deep and understand the origins of the book, you can go listen to episode 50 of this podcast or just head over to rockschoolproprietor.com/book for all the details. Welcome to Rock School Proprietor Podcast. My guest on the show today is the founder of UnlimitedGuitar.com, former founder of Fort Worth Music Academy, Eric Bourassa. Hey, Eric, how you been?
Hey, John. And by the way, it still blows my mind that I have a website called UnlimitedGuitar.com. The fact that I got that domain, I have no idea.
Yeah. So, Eric, I mentioned former owner of Fort Worth Music Academy.
Yes.
And you recently sold. We're going to get into that. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about Unlimited Guitar and kind of your shift. Like, you and I go back quite a few years. At one point, we were in like a small music school owner mastermind group.
Yeah, with Dave Simon. That was fun.
Yeah, with Dave. And since then, I've always thought, like, man, Eric has such this fun personality, and I see that coming through on what you're doing with Unlimited Guitar. Not only that, what I think makes you really appealing to someone who wants to go through your courses, and I think you do like a weekly group call with the members, right?
Yep.
What I've always thought this about you. Your style of guitar playing is sort of representative of your personality and the mix of musical influences that I see that come out of you, which is weird because it's one, you've got like some shredder aspects. I think Joe Satriani sort of comes to mind.
Yep. He's my favorite guitar player.
But then you also have, like, you're a big fan of pop music.
I love pop music. Love it.
And that sweet spot right in between those, pop punk music. Which all of that stuff, I think is just, it sort of shows this broad range of how you personally are able to connect with any individual learner's sensibility and what they want to do. Because oftentimes when it comes to shredding guitar players, there's a bit of this elitism.
Right.
And the idea of wanting to play some pop songs, be like, right, but you just you lean into it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying that. That's a nice way of putting it. I think it's a double-edged sword because, on the positive, I can relate to people who just like nice, simple, catchy pop music because I'm right there with them. But then I also can appreciate when people want to hear just crazy, over-the-top, Dream Theater-esque shenanigans, because I also like that. And kind of everything in between. And pop punk is kind of a sweet spot for me because you frequently get like really cool guitar riffs, but then also simple, catchy things, but with the energy of like shred guitar to me has a lot of energy to it, and pop punk brings that same energy, but just in a different way. But the double-edged sword of that is that it makes it hard to find my niche online,
Mhm.
like when it comes to teaching and when it comes to building an audience. Because on the one hand, I'm like, ooh, I really like this Joe Satriani song or idea. I'd love to do a cover of that, or I want to teach a lesson on that. And then the next day, I might do a Blink 182 guitar lesson. And so it doesn't work with the YouTube algorithm. And then people who watch my
Oh,
Satriani stuff are like, I don't care about Blink 182, and then vice versa. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I'm kind of all over the place in that way.
That's really interesting and something I never really thought about because you mentioned the YouTube algorithm,
Yeah.
which obviously very mechanical. You know, there's not that personality in there to say, like, when I think about you, Eric, I think like, man, Eric's personality is like shines through in everything he does.
Oh, thank
And
you.
I think that is super appealing to pretty much anyone who wants to learn how to play music, whether you're into shredding or you're into pop, because you're able to shift and you don't have that elitist attitude, but the YouTube algorithm apparently likes the elitist attitude.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or vice versa or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
don't
I can
lean enough into, like, if I was really, really strategic, I would lean into one thing only, and I would make far more negative videos than positive videos. But I don't like, as we know, like with news and with YouTube, if you hate something, you're going to get far more engagement. And I've done a few videos like that when I'm like, you know what, this is something I really don't like, but I do kind of want to talk about it. Anytime
Mhm.
I've posted that video, I always kind of have kind of an icky feeling afterwards.
Right.
And I'm
Right.
like, I think I'm mostly just going to stay away from that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's made it, I think, a more challenging, long road. But I I just feel better just being myself. And I
Yeah.
find that not pretending to be anyone other than myself is, even if it doesn't serve me in the short term, I think in the long run that's what will serve me best.
Yeah. I believe in that as well. And I fingers crossed. I hope that for you too. Well, so unlimitedguitar.com
Yeah.
is your website for all that. And obviously you've got a YouTube channel and you've done all the technical work to sort of put those two together. And but it wasn't too long ago that you were in the brick and mortar world with the rest of us, or with
Yes.
maybe, I mean, there's just two of us right now, so with me. And Fort Worth Music Academy was your school.
Yeah.
And but I did want to get into that about how you recently sold. And when I say recently, I think it's been what, in the past year or
Yeah,
so
yeah, it
that it's
was
been finalized.
October 1st, 2024. So less than a year ago.
Okay, so to backtrack and give a little backstory, when did you establish Fort Worth Music Academy? And I think it was a different name
It
originally.
was, yeah. Well, the way it kind of came about was, like pretty much almost anybody in our industry, it started out with dreams of rock stardom and touring the world.
Mhm.
And my mom actually encouraged me smartly. So after I graduated college to teach, well, I was going to just teach guitar in the evenings. I
Yeah.
was like, it's just a way to make money, but I'm not really passionate about teaching. I don't care about it, but I hadn't really done it. So I didn't even know. And then my mom was like, well, why don't you substitute teach during the day, like at an elementary school?
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, that's smart. I'm not doing anything else. So long story short, I ended up getting the music teacher job at my old elementary school. And then all the while I was teaching lessons out of my house in the evening. And then it kind of got to a point where teaching the lessons out of the house became kind of too much. And I was like,
Yeah.
I kind of have to pick. And while I loved teaching elementary school, only one of those had the growth financially that could support my family long term.
Mhm.
So then I just taught out of my house for several years. And then when it got to the point where I was teaching 80 people out of my house, It was a lot for my wife. It was a lot for the neighbors.
Yeah.
Just those cars always there. And so I rented a space and called it Ridgely School of Music. And that was April 1st of 2014. And then I started hiring employees, and people were always mispronouncing the name of the school. And so I thought, you know what? We live in the city of Fort Worth. Let's go with Fort Worth Music Academy. And we
Yeah.
switched that name. And I had the music school for a little over 10 years.
Okay. So 10 years, I'm at 11 with my studio currently, so kind of understand that journey. And then you decided to sell. So I do want to get into how all of that worked, but first understanding your motivation and what made you decide, I think it's time to sell, or I don't want to do this anymore. Where did all that come from?
It all comes from one word, and that's ego. And so this is my warning to people, is to check your ego. And I think this is something I probably should go to therapy for, because I think there's a lot to dig into and unpack with it.
Yeah.
Because what seemed like on the surface my motivation, I don't think was actually my real reason for doing it. I had never considered selling my business. And I've noticed with a few things in my life, just in the history of my life, I think it's really important to have a clear vision of what you want, because
Mhm.
if you don't, or you let yourself get sidetracked, someone else will present a vision to you. And then you may just find yourself either wanting to please that person, or just because of a lack of clear vision for yourself, just following someone else's vision. And which I don't think is always a bad thing. But in this case, someone who owned other local music schools around the area just mentioned it to me and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about selling?" I was like, "No, why would I do that?
Yeah.
It's basically free money, and I like my music school, and it's not that terribly hard now after 10 years." I mean, I was probably 8 years in at that point. But, at first it was hard, as I'm sure it was for you, working out some of the kinks in the beginning. But
Mhm.
by the 10-year mark, you've usually we had a really good system in place,
Yeah.
and I was happy with it. But I think what really happened was maybe about a year after he had just planted that idea in my mind,
Okay.
and we had kind of hit a ceiling as a music school, where
Mhm.
I thought, surely with all the work I've done, we can get bigger than this. We can get a better studio space. I just had ideas for how we could make the school better. And
Yeah.
we just seemed stuck. And no matter what I did, it seemed like we just couldn't get past this certain level. And and so again, here comes my ego, me thinking we're not good enough. And
Mm.
here is somebody else who had built bigger schools than me. And I felt what's inadequate in terms of not being able to get to the next level. And I thought maybe the best thing is to just give this to somebody who can take it to that next level. That's what our teachers deserve. That's what our students deserve. And I'm not giving them the best that they can have. So
Yeah.
that was part of it. The other part of it was that I have always wanted to be a full-time touring musician. And I
Yeah.
thought, I'm not getting any younger. I fear after 10 years of owning music school that I'm going to be stuck. And
Mhm.
that if that this level of comfort, I'm probably never going to pursue that full time. So so it felt kind of win-win. Number one, my own feelings of inadequacy about what we've done with the music school, handing that off to somebody else so that they can take the ball and run with it. But then also, by cutting that cord, by burning that bridge, it's going to force me into action, to take
Mhm.
big action towards a music career. So we can talk about the aftermath of all of that and kind of the lessons I've learned from this. But I think those were my true motivations.
Okay. That's really interesting. and I'll add a little bit of context here only because I'm somewhat familiar with the story you just told. Creative Soul Music School is the new name of your former studio, and I think maybe 6, 7 locations in
Yes.
your area, something like that.
Yes.
Right? Okay, and so maybe we'll make this a therapy session. I don't know. So that's super interesting to me that you hadn't thought about that and they just approached you and like planted that seed.
Yes.
From the time that they approached you and said, "Have you considered this?" to the time that you ultimately engaged in negotiations, what was the timeline there?
I think that was about a 2-year period. It was probably
Okay.
about a year after. And by the way, Casey is the owner of Creative Soul, and I got nothing but love for the guy. He
Yeah.
has been nothing but patient with me during the selling process and even after, and just really, really a great guy, really passionate about what he does. So about a year after, I then called him up in. We talked every few months, just kind of checking in, and then I finally said, maybe I'd be interested in exploring this idea of
Mhm.
selling. And then about 6 months after that, of us trying to work something out, I realized, I was like, this isn't going to work. This doesn't make sense. And then a few months after that, he called me back and he was like, I have an idea for how I think it can work. And by the time he had called me at that point, I was knee deep into starting to play professionally in bands. And then also I had started another business that I just had an idea for, and kind of without thinking through the consequences, I just kind of went for it. And I was pretty stressed out at that point. And I was
Yeah.
in such a state of stress that when he said, "Hey, I think we can make this work," I was like, "Fine, let's do it," because I don't, I'm not giving the attention to the music school that it needs, and I'm kind of like burning the candle at both ends anyway. And so
Mhm.
I was kind of ready to do whatever was necessary to sell, just with the emotional state that I was in.
Yeah, that I hear where you're coming from, and I've kind of been following a little bit as a bystander on your journey through social media posts. So I know that other business, you started a gym and like you've got courses and you're deep into that. And I think, all right, playing armchair therapist here, Eric, you said it in the beginning. You kind of you didn't have a clear vision for what you wanted.
Yeah.
And so, but you want success in like everything that you do. And so you've got all these fires burning,
Yeah.
and and that I can see where that sort of went to overwhelm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I was just doing too many different things. Ultimately, the vision was, how do I make a living as a musician and support my family? And
mhm,
so, but I knew, well, in my mind, it was, I need to have these other businesses supporting that. And then it just got to a level where it was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, with the gym, I loved it and I loved the idea, but I was like, I'm doing this like sun up to sundown. I'm never going to play guitar again. I'm never going to be a musician if I continue in this way. So I learned that business only lasted 3 months before I realized, I was like, I don't have time to do this.
mhm. I can speak from experience as well with not starting other businesses, but starting new projects and primarily diversifying my own business. One thing that I've learned in doing that is it's always those new projects, those things are always a lot slower to gain any sort of steam because in my head, I think like, oh, well, I've done this before. I started, like my current music school is my second, so I've gone through the building and sale process also.
Wait, did you
I,
sell your first music school?
I did, yeah,
I didn't know this.
yes,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So the but the building process when when you're starting and it's just you, oftentimes in your life, you're just like, okay, this is what I'm focused on, this single thing. I have nothing but energy and time to put into this thing, and it's small. So managing that thing is really easy. As it grows, it becomes more challenging. So now in hindsight, you're 10 years in and you're like, got a thriving business. Yes, you have systems in place that make everything work well, but you still have a full-time job managing it, right?
Right, right.
And so then when you say, oh, I'm going to start this other side business, or, oh, I'm going to start this other project, in your mind, you think, I did it before. I can do it again in this sort of time frame.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not realizing like, oh yeah, but I can't just not go to my full-time job, which is running my current business.
Yeah. Well, and so in my mind, the music school got to a point where it was pretty much running without me. And so I thought, I don't have to spend that much time on it. And I think when I started the gym, I didn't realize just how much time I was actually giving to the music school. That was eye-opening.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that sale process and the negotiation process, because I think you mentioned Casey, is the new owner's name, approached you. He approached you presumably because he saw, man, Eric's got this great business, and man, that would be a great addition to our company if he were ever willing to sell. So were there any specifics that you think he looked at, or did he disclose what those specifics were about your business that made it attractive to him?
Yes.
As an acquisition.
Yeah. It made me proud because he said that most of the music schools he looked at were barely getting by. And he would see an opportunity of how to make them profitable. But he said what was appealing about my business was that we were already profitable. And even though we had less students than a lot of the big music schools, we were financially in way better shape.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in terms of big, small, relatively speaking, when he looked at your studio, what kind of numbers were you at when he decided, yep, I'm going to buy this?
We were kind of floating between the 130 to 145 student range.
Okay. Yeah, and having been there, that's like getting to that 200 when you're between 150 and 200, for whatever reason, I've noticed that's a hard number to jump through, that 150 to 200. And it feels good, when you start seeing the numbers go up. But man, that over 200, I think that sort of that's like this, for whatever reason, this weird bar that we all want to hit, right? We hit 100 and we're like, yeah, right?
Yep.
And then the next one is 200, but that's a tough one.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we never got to 200, but that was always the number in my mind that I wanted to hit, just like you said.
But yeah, like you said, you can be incredibly profitable even under 200. Yeah. So now when Casey's looking at adding Fort Worth Music Academy to Creative Soul, his other locations, what are the numbers? Do you know what the numbers are?
I know that the total number of students that they had was about 1,400 students between all locations. So on average, 250 to 300 students, I think, per location.
Okay. So yeah, they figured out that next bump. So negotiation process. Yeah. What was that like?
Yes. So like I mentioned, at first, we were just talking numbers, and he did the EBITDA, whatever that's called. EBITDA. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I didn't do that when I sold, but yeah.
Okay. So he did all that legwork, and I sent him a bunch of numbers and everything. And so there's some industry standard formula that says like, hey, this is roughly how much it's worth and all of that. And so we kind of just negotiated like how much we didn't really negotiate what the total number was, but how that was going to get paid out was kind
Yeah.
of what we went back and forth on. And then, and then ultimately I walked away from that because it just didn't make sense to me. I was at a point where it was like, okay, my business is profitable. My family is
Hmm.
comfortable. I can work as much or as little as I want. I only had a handful of students of my own. My team was great. I loved my students. I had a great front desk person who, they were all running the day to day. And then I was just there to kind of assist and put out big fires and if I needed to, but that was happening less and less. I was really happy, honestly, with it. But it was
Hmm.
just still this feeling of like not enough. It's not enough. And then my business mentor also was like, I was like, hey, what do you think about this? And he was like, you should totally sell. It's a great learning experience. And I started then thinking, oh, what will other people think of me? Like, whoa, Eric built a business and then he sold it. He sold his first business and now he's going to do
Hmm.
bigger and better things. So again, my ego talking to
Right.
me and
Yeah.
just totally ignoring that, like, Eric, you did the American dream. You achieved it.
Right.
You built
Yeah.
something great. Our students were happy. Our teachers were happy. I was pretty happy. My family was happy. Like, what more is there? But somehow it wasn't good enough, right? So anyway,
Yeah.
so I think I kind of had that realization a little bit. And so I walked away. But then when he had presented this new idea to me, I was knee deep in starting this other business. And so when they presented the paperwork, this is going to sound so dumb to people hearing it from the outside, but when you're in it, you don't always think rationally. He said, hey, we can save some money. We can just use one lawyer and split the cost.
Right.
I know, it was dumb. I should have hired my own lawyer to look over all the numbers and negotiate better, but I didn't. I was just so hell-bent on the idea of, like, it's going to be such a badge of honor to say I sold a business that I just kind of went through. I didn't pay attention to the non-compete. I didn't pay attention to something else that I don't want to get into the details of, but we spoke about a very specific thing that if something happened, my payouts would stop.
Hmm.
And we had talked about what that was going to look like, but then what it actually ended up being in the paperwork was very different.
Yeah.
And that was quite frustrating. And I just didn't I kind of combed through everything. And then I was like, I trust them. We have a good relationship. But honestly, when you're putting together a contract for someone else to sign, you're going to put it together to for you to have the best outcome. And then you expect that other person to negotiate. And I just didn't really do that. So
Sure.
my non-compete should have been 2 years and it ended up being 5 years. So I still have over another 4 years to go before I can open another music school. Yeah. So I should have hired my own lawyer. I should have negotiated a 2-year non-compete. And that other piece I should have not done. I should have taken that out entirely. Or if I think they would have said no, I should have been willing to walk away at that point.
Yeah. Well, I can relate. When I sold my first music school, it
Yeah,
was
I'm
an
very
internal
interested to
sale.
hear
Yeah.
about this.
I sold it to two of my instructors who were working for me in vested interest. And the circumstances for me were I was going to move out of state. The deal was done. So my choices were, all right, well, I either just pack everything up and close shop, right? Maybe give my student lists to the instructors and say, see you guys. I could have, and this was 2013. So I could have potentially looked around locally for other buyers, but I didn't want to go through that process,
Yeah.
And so I had these two sharp, instructors who were vested in what we had built. And so I approached them and they agreed to buy it. But very similarly, you know, there were they'd never owned a business, right? They'd never been in this situation. It was my first business at the time. I knew, okay, I've got to hire a lawyer to fill out paperwork and draw up this contract. And in going through that process with the lawyer, I learned like, oh, you can write anything you want in this contract. This can be like absolutely anything. And, it was a very simple contract. And because I was leaving state, there was nothing about like non-competes or anything like that. And I liked these guys. I had no ulterior motives because I was looking at it from the perspective of I'm either going to walk away from this business basically and have nothing, or I'm going to come to an agreement with these two guys that I like and I care about and I want to see them succeed, and it'll be mutually beneficial, So I got a little bit of money in my pocket so I don't have to work for the next year and a half or whatever. You know what I mean?
Makes sense.
But so I guess my situation was a little bit different. So we weren't dealing with non-competes and things like that. So did you ever at any point think about looking for other buyers? Because at this point, I can think of two companies that I know that are national companies that look to buy music schools. And did that ever even like cross your mind?
I think I talked with Dave Simon about it a couple of times, but the company that he was working with, we just weren't big enough in terms of what we were doing. So they had a certain threshold that they wanted. And so that was it. But no, other than that, it was, I wanted to sell to somebody that I trusted, that I thought would be a good steward of the music school. And since I had a personal relationship with Casey, I trusted him and no. So it really didn't occur to me to try to sell to anybody else.
Was there ever any consideration for negotiating a situation where like you could maybe teach for them or stay on staff in some other role?
And I do. So my students that I've been teaching for a long time, I am still teaching at their new location at the music school. So I am still involved in a small way there. And then I have also presented to Casey an idea for kind of a win-win, possibly moving forward. So my involvement with them may expand. We'll see. But I think they know that I plan to, once my non-compete is over, October 1st, 2029, I'll be opening my next music school. Like, no question. I figured that out the first week that I walked into their music school. I mean, it's beautiful. The building that they have, everything they do. But I think this is just a consequence of when you do your own thing for so long, you're just used to doing things your own way. So coming under their umbrella and having to learn to follow their system when I've had my own system is just sort of like, well, I've already been doing it this way for so long. Why would I change and do it like that? And then I was just kind of like, I should do this again.
So kind of alluded to this, but regrets. I mean, it sounds like you have regrets. You had regrets pretty quickly. How quickly did that sort of set in after you sold?
Like I said, it was within the first week of.
Wow.
Yeah. It was like instant. I was like, oh no, I shouldn't have done that. Let's find a way to do it again. Because the reality is I loved my school. I loved the community that we had built. In my mind, before we look, it's one of those things where it's hindsight is always 20/20.
Sure.
But when I don't think I would have learned this any other way, but it just made me appreciate my school so much more. In my mind, my music school had no personality. There was no sense of community. There was nothing we were doing that was original or cool or distinct. We were just a run-of-the-mill music school. That was my attitude. And then as soon as we walked into the new place, I started noticing, not for better or for worse, but just all the differences. And And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, we did have community. We did have personality. The way we ran our
Mhm.
concerts was special. The atmosphere of coming to our lobby was special. Everything we did was great. The students and the families that we served, they were special. Like we had zero problems with people. Like
Yeah.
we had great relationships with all the families. It was very rare for somebody to come on board with our school, have a bad experience, and then leave immediately. And typically, if it was someone who left immediately, it was for the best because they just weren't a good fit. And then our teachers were special, and I just realized, I was like, our music school was more special than I realized. And so, yeah, I have no doubt
Mhm.
in my mind. Like I want to do that. I want to recreate that.
As an outside observer, and I think I even started this entire podcast talking about, your personality and how I think it's attractive to students and families. And you're just a warm, welcoming guy. You're a fun guy to interact with. And it it is interesting how we don't always see that in our own selves. And because I'm sure all of that came through in your studio. And that speaks to the success and like what that culture was and the community that you've built. So it is interesting that when you sort of took yourself out of it is when you saw like, oh, it sort of created its own identity and took on a life of its own.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. It's yeah. We had, like I said, we had the families we worked with were amazing. Our teachers were amazing. The atmosphere of the school was vibrant, was fun, was welcoming, and there was a lot of life and personality to it. And our student concerts were the same way. But I just I didn't see it until it was gone.
In hindsight, and I'm thinking in terms of any other people like us who run music schools and might be thinking like similar, like, oh, there's nothing special about my music school, or oh, I think I should sell because of this or that. Do you think there would have been anything or anyone who could have talked to you about the great stuff that you did create in your studio that would have changed your mind? I mean, like jokingly, you mentioned therapy.
Yeah, if I had gotten into therapy about a decade ago, that could have prevented all this. I don't know if there's anything that could have stopped me because I am, for better or for worse, pretty stubborn. And
Yeah.
once I've made my mind up about something, like there's pretty much no changing my mind. And it's interesting because I've had quite a few people message me after I sold the business. They're like, congratulations, must be nice. I would love to sell my own business. And I'm like pleading with all of them. I'm like, don't. I'm like,
Mhm.
maybe it's the right thing for you, but really take a long, hard look at what your life looks like. And also, what is your plan for after you sell? Because more than likely, that money's not going to last forever. You have to have a new line of income already ready to go. And maybe if you just absolutely hate your business, then okay. But like 9 times out of 10, I think most people they 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 like it, but there's just some of the frustrations, and the grass is always greener. And so I think taking stock of like what really matters and what you've really built, and the feeling of getting rid of all of that is, I don't know, but it's hard. It's hard to convey that feeling to somebody without going through it.
Yeah. That's fantastic advice. And I think honestly that's the perfect way to end this, like because you summed it up. The grass is always greener. It feels good to make these decisions, right? To say like, okay, I'm going to do it, and feeling like any sort of baggage that comes along with that disappears, and kind of turns out, well, we're always carrying our baggage.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, Eric. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, and man, I'll be counting down for you till 2029.
I have lots of time to come up with ideas and things between now and then, and I'm just gonna enjoy the journey in the meantime.
Right. And in the meantime, unlimitedguitar.com is
Yeah.
where your courses are. And
I've got some
I played
great
around with it.
students in unlimited guitar. Just shout out to my students that I'm working with personally. Like my first online student, Jay, who lives in the UK, who's still with me, and then Pedro from Australia, and then more recently, and then Ryan, my friend Ryan out of Salt Lake City, and then I've got like Trevor and Alex, who more recently came on board, and we just have a lot of fun, like in our live calls and in the video exchange. And then I have fun putting together the lessons and everything. So it's cool. I'm really proud of it, and I look forward to continuing to run that even once I get a brick and mortar music school going again.
And that speaks to your ability to create that community. You know, even in your online community, you're having fun with these calls and your students. And it seems like doesn't matter where you go, whether that's brick and mortar or online, you're bringing that personality and that sense of enjoyment to the learners.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
congrats, man.
I hope so, and I hope to continue doing that.
All right. Well, Eric, again, thank you. And that'll wrap it up for Rock School Proprietor Podcast. We'll see you next time. A big thank you again to Eric Bourassa for joining me on the podcast. You can follow what Eric's doing over at unlimitedguitar.com. If you've got questions about selling in music school, get in touch. I'm happy to share any information I can about my experience selling my first school, or I can connect you with Eric, and I know he'd be glad to help you as well. Visit our website for show notes and resources, rockschoolproprietor.com. Connect with me on social media. On Instagram, I'm at rock.school.proprietor, and John Kazicki on both LinkedIn and Blue Sky. Ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify are always appreciated. And if you gained insight from our conversation, then we count that as a win. All we ask in return is that you pay it forward. Please share this show with someone you think needs to hear it.